I know how it goes. I know how it goes. How y'all doing today? My name is Brett Buckner. I'm finishing my master's here at Metro State University. We look for these graduates of December of this year. I'm proud to be a part of the Institute on Community Engagement and Scholarship, who has brought this wonderful exhibit down there. How'd y'all enjoy the exhibit? All right. We got a lot to fill out today, and we got a great leader to be able to pull us together. Professor Lena Jones from MCTC. But first, I want to do a couple little housekeeping pieces. One, today is just a day of celebration that this exhibit has been here at Metro State University for this semester. The exhibit is open until 8 o'clock tonight. So if you need one more run through, please go do it. But to have the Smithsonian to be able to come into our institution is an honor, and we should be ecstatic about it. And thank you for the university for pulling this together. So thank you, everybody. Two, again, I'm going to introduce Lena in a second here. But after that, we're going to have a quick little Q&A. Think of the questions, off of the exhibit that you just went through. Think about what's going on in our society at this moment in time. And again, can't stress it enough, there's an election coming up in a couple of days. How many of y'all heard about that? Yeah. All right. How many of y'all registered to vote? All right. How many of y'all voting is the question. All right. That's going to be very important, but I think Lena's going to really amplify that message of why the importance is there to do it. So after our Q&A, I know that students are going to have to take off just a little bit early so y'all can get your bus and everything else. And again, thank you for coming out. We'll continue on until about 2:30, kind of finishing up. And again, cannot stress it enough, having a celebration of this Smithsonian here at the university is an amazing thing. So glad that you're here with us. So without further ado, we're going to start this off pretty straightforward, our Metro style. Get to the chase. We're going to bring up Lena Jones. I want to be able to talk about different, actually, and I've been honored to be able to work with Lena on several projects across the community. He's a family friend as well. He's been there thick and thin through some very trying times over the past couple. So it's an honor to be able to bring her up. Lena Jones is a political science instructor at Minneapolis Community and Technical College. It's one of 8 people to be named and a part of a cohort in 2013 fellowship that is working on, Bush Fellowship, that is working on immigration, urban and native communities throughout the metropolitan area. As Lena says, I want to see a Twin Cities where everyone, regardless of race, creed, income, neighborhood, or gender, is able to live in dignity in a community that is safe and provides everything that they need. It's a powerful vision. She continues on that she hopes that her fellowship will provide the resources, relationships, and experiences to help play a larger role into creating that vision. And that's amazing. Thank you. And I want you to understand that the Bush Fellowship is a major award. That in 51 years, there's only been just over 2,000 people who have received it. And every year, at least 500 people apply for it. So she's in select and rare air. And she's ours. You can take the courses from her right now. She also received a grant from the Keynote Foundation, which has helped increase civic engagement and service learning opportunities for students and faculty at MCTC. The Keynote Foundation seeks to identify and address challenges to democracy through interrelated programs that focuses on citizens, community, and institutions. And also, Lena has been doing this amazing thing, which is basically the bulk, which will be the foundation of her conversation today, where she has been working with the HECUA organization, the Higher Education Consortium for Urban Affairs. And with that, Race in America Then and Now, the 6-credit field study, what they do every June is they go down south and they start to walk in the footsteps of our ancestors, learning directly from the people who actually made it happen. And we're about to hear this powerful message right now. So without further ado, I'd like to bring up my friend, Professor Lena Jones.
All right, I haven't tested this mic. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
All right, great. So, I'm actually going to start off by asking you all a question. All right, so none of this, me yakking up here and then, you asking me stuff at the end. Most of you saw the exhibit, right? Right, and a lot of you are, did I hear from Central High School? Yeah, who's from Central? Not to put y'all on the spot, but I'm gonna. All right, that's awesome that you're here. So, I'm gonna ask you a question, and I want you to answer this honestly. Okay, so why bother studying history? Why bother studying this stuff? And how does this relate to your own life? What connections did you make between, the text and the photos and the stories that you learned about while going through this exhibit in your own lives? What connections can you make? And why does it matter? Maybe get a few thoughts about that. Yes? Maybe say your name too.
Hi, favorite.
All right.
So history doesn't repeat itself.
Okay, so kind of learning lessons from the past. Okay. Yeah, unfortunately, humans seem to be really bad at that, but that's a good aspiration. Right. Yes, thank you. Maybe a few more. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Kadeem. My name is Kadeem, and we study it so we know why Black people are in the position they are in today.
Okay, all right. So to get some context about why things are the way they are now, right? Okay, great. Get a few more. What about this table here? What are your thoughts? What did you think of the exhibit? How's it relevant to your lives? What's your name? Elijah? Okay.
And I thought the exhibit was very insightful with facts about how they plotted everything, how it went down.
So kind of what was really interesting to you was the strategy part. Yeah, and how they plotted, it wasn't just, one day, I'm tired, I'm gonna sit down, right? And get arrested. No, I mean, right? Right? Yeah, I mean, these are folks who, who thought things out, strategized. Absolutely. Over long periods of time. Absolutely. Thank you. Maybe one more? Yes?
I was impressed with, especially with photos of 1904, 1905, and then maybe a few other years of celebrating the Emancipation Proclamation Day in September.
Mm-hmm.
And growing up, I never heard about it, that there were little parades, that there were celebrations after it happened.
Right.
That, other than at the end of the war.
Right.
And I guess it triggered a little guilt because I'm unaware of anything that happens in September on this day, or if cities have continued, or communities have continued to celebrate that. And so, next September, I don't know, we're there. It's sort of like something in my heart that, I think I'll kind of remember that we need to pay attention to more things going on that are commemorative, because for the reasons that have been said here, that there's so much more strategy in this that I really admired that I just didn't know anything about.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that. So, so I'm going to talk a bit about a course that I teach and that I've taught over the past 10 years called Race in America Then and Now. So, all right. So I wonder if any of you noticed the title of the talk, right? You know, Race in America Then and Now, Post-Racial Perspectives on the Civil Rights Movement. Yeah. Hopefully you noticed the quotes. Because by any means am I trying to say that we're in some sort of post-racial society. And actually the name of the talk came from this course that I taught. And you know, and because I didn't really tell the folks who organized it, you know, all right, here's what I want my talk to be named. So it's named after my course. So notice the quotes. And I'm going to be talking about this journey, you know, that I've had over the past 10 years. A little bit about the origins of this course. So a version of this course was taught by a woman who's a professor at Macalester named Duchess Harris. Has anyone heard of Duchess Harris? Yeah. So she is actually the creator of a version of this course for an organization called the Higher Education Consortium for Urban Affairs. Now, you know, some of you may be Metro students, but those of you who are about to go into college, HECUA is an organization that offers these really amazing, deeply experiential courses on a variety of social justice issues, both here in the United States and abroad. And, you know, if you're a college student, you can take courses, these courses that, like I said, deeply experiential, like the one I teach. So in 2005, one of my colleagues at the time, who's now at Metro, a guy named Stanley Hatcher. Yeah, you know Stan, yeah. Yeah, he used to be my colleague. You know, it's 2005, and, you know, Rosa Parks passed away, 2005. Y'all know who Rosa Parks is? You've heard of her, right? I had some students, and even some African-American students, who never heard of Rosa Parks. Never heard of her, right? Even the simplest civil rights narrative has Rosa Parks in it, you know, and some students didn't know who she was, you know, and I think that plus kind of our distress about the general lack of knowledge that students had about this really rich history, you know, this social movement that was one of the most significant social movements of the 20th century that had an impact on all of our lives, you know, made us think, man, we need to like get a busload of students and go down south with them, you know, and just hit the museums, talk to people, whatever. And then I remembered back when I was a graduate student at the University of Minnesota that saw a guest speaker from HECUA came to talk about the version of this civil rights class that they taught. So I cold called HECUA and said, hey, would you be willing to do a summer version of this class? You know, and then essentially he said, would you be willing to teach it? I was like, oh, okay, I guess so. Right. So the rest is history. So if I were to actually put the work in and think of a title of this course, you know, it might be Race in America, and then kind of paralleling, you know, this exhibit here, 1863, 1963, I might do 2006, 2016. Not quite as much time, but also kind of looking at the interesting things that have evolved and changed over this 10-year span. So, so when I think about the evolution of this course, you know, I see three phases that I think, you know, in some ways parallel kind of the general feelings beyond the course about history and rights and race and so forth. You know, I see three phases. The first phase that I saw pretty deeply, you know, during the first few years that I taught the course was around fighting erasure. What do you think I mean by that? And that the erasure term was actually a term that was used and captured by one of my students in 2006. Fighting erasure.
I'll take a guess.
Yeah,
I think it's when people try to erase our history of what was done.
voila, exactly. And there are a few things that lead to this erasure. Well, one is time, you know. Up here I have 3 people who sadly have passed away during the time that I've been teaching this course. You know, one is an amazing man who was an amazing figure in Birmingham, Alabama, Fred Shuttlesworth, who we got to spend some time with a couple of years. We have Matthew Walker, who also passed away, who was a freedom rider. And we also have a guy named Jimmy Travis, you know, who was a member of SNCC. Anyone know what SNCC is? Yeah, what's SNCC?
Student Nonviolent
Cool.
Coordinating Committee.
Right, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. I just want to make sure because I'm throwing around these acronyms. You know, SNCC was one of the major civil rights organizations. You know, and it was kind of the young folks. You know, sometimes called the shock troops. You know, of the movement. Right. So, so time leads to some of this erasure, but there's some, you know, more sinister things that lead to this erasure too. You know, one of the interesting things that you see in a lot of places is kind of the battle, you know, like well, let me just point this out. All right, so see this panel here? The story is literally disappearing. This is in Nashville, Tennessee. This is it was a panel that was telling the story of the sit-ins. You know, so you had students, you know, from colleges such as Fisk University and Tennessee State, you know, that were fighting fighting segregation, and one of the sites where they fought that was in the lunch counters in stores like Crest and Woolworth and so forth. You know, so this was a panel kind of describing that, and the text is literally disappeared. Right? And that's pretty much the only thing that was on that sheet. You also have a lot of lonely historical placards. You know. How many of you actually stopped to read historical plaques? There were a few folks, but you know, again, particularly when they're not contextualized, you know, most people don't read them, right? And then here, this one's also in Nashville, so Nashville, a lot of you, this one is actually broken up. You know. This one was one that was in front of, I think, the first African-American bank in Nashville that still exists. You know, erasure happens also through barriers, you know, that are placed between us and our history. You know, this is a photograph of one of our students trespassing someplace to read their historical placard. You know, that was actually locked away. You know, so we had to actually hop the fence in order to read this placard about the Middle Passage. This is also in Nashville. Through decay. These are some images from Mississippi. Anyone heard of Emmett Till?
Yeah.
Okay, who's Emmett Till? That's who's.
I think he was a 14-year-old boy who had a lisp, and a white woman recollected it as he was whistling at her, so she had him feel.
Right. A young boy visiting, you know, his relative he was from Chicago, down visiting, from Mississippi, you know, it depends on the story, right? Maybe whistled, made a comment, you know, to a white woman who was working in the store and ended up murdered. And the image of Emmett Till is one that you almost speak to almost any person of that generation. Is something that was the thing that kind of activated, you know, their consciousness about how bad things really, really, really were. You know, so that's the story. That's the state of the story. The Bryant grocery store. Right, well, that's actually the state in 2006, it's even worse now. You know, and this was the old office of SNCC, you know, in Greenwood, rather, Mississippi. And then some other images as well. You know, this is the A.G. Gaston Hotel, which is another place that had a major, you know, it was a major site, you know, where, civil rights activists like Dr. King, you know, and others. It was a Black-owned hotel in Birmingham, Alabama. King stayed there, you know, as well as other folks, because basically that's where they had to stay. And yeah, it's now in great disrepair. And then, of course, there are modern versions of Erasure too. These are some images of, you know, New Orleans. And Lower Ninth Ward, that used to be a neighborhood. Erasure. This is the site of a housing project, you know, that was demolished. That was still in good condition, but demolished. Erasure. And decay as well. Greyhound Station, Montgomery. You know, that was again the site of some major events, and that's how it looked in 2006. Now, well, what if you do get to the point where, right, people are acknowledging one story? It's it takes some work to actually have some control over that story. So one of the interesting things that you start to see, that I started to see, you know, kind of in phase 2, you know, was kind of the struggle over who tells the movement, who tells the story of the movement, how they tell it, and who profits from it. Here we have, remember that Greyhound Station I showed you in the last slide? You know, now it's a Freedom Rides Museum. However, I don't know how it is, it's been a few years since I've been there, but the first time we went there, frankly, it was really, it was somewhat disappointing. And sadly, you know, there were, again, it may be different now, been a few years, but sadly there were folks who were kind of leading our tour, you know, who clearly didn't know the story, didn't have any connection to the story, you know, and that's one of the interesting dangers of this. Yet, you know, this is an institution that people are stopping by and paying money to go into, and run by the Alabama Historical Society. Oops. Another interesting event that took place in 2011 was the 50th anniversary of the Freedom Rides. And one of the struggles here is around when folks realize that the movement is a potential source of money and profit. You know, so interestingly here, you know, you have some civil rights veterans pushing against the then governor of Mississippi, a guy named Haley Barbour, who saw that, you know, movement is a potential source of profit for Mississippi, and that it would benefit Mississippi to present, you know, a sanitized version of the movement, you know, as a way to bring in tourism dollars. You know, and this was often, you know, explicitly said. I'll keep going backwards. One of the groups that we spend a lot of time with, and you can check out the website, it's called justiceinmississippi.org, is a group of civil rights veterans led by a man named John Steele, who is the son of Cornelius Steele, who was one of the few African-American landowners in Neshoba County, Mississippi. And the Steel Farm was one of the major refuges for civil rights workers in that area of Mississippi. It was one of the safe places where they could go and get a meal and strategize and so forth. And there's another interesting documentary, as an aside, called, oh man, just looking, oh wow, all right, I'll think of it, it'll come back. You know, that looks at the role of Black landowners in the movement as well and how they were kind of foundational as well. So for, ever since 1964, we'll just kind of back it up a bit. Any of you heard of Goodman, Cheney, Schwerner? Those three names ring a bell? I see one person, I see kind of a tentative hand raised, right? Yeah, anyone want to take a guess? Who were they? Goodman, Cheney, Schwerner. Yes. Oh, well, actually, in Neshoba County. Yeah, Neshoba. Yep. Yeah, so, so they were 3 civil rights workers. Two of them, Andrew Goodman and Michael Schwerner, were white, and James Cheney was Black. And they were actually researching the burning of a church. Interesting, did y'all hear about the most recent church burning this week in Mississippi? Yeah, so it's still happening. Right, and actually they stopped at the Steel Farm for lunch, and that was one of the last times they were seen, before they turned up dead. So ever since then, the Steel family has been having, this grassroots memorial service where they both, at least until where they pushed for the prosecution of the murderers of Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner, but also of other civil rights martyrs who were murdered as well. And if you want to read a bit about kind of how, the co-optation thing plays out here too, I'll give you the very short version. There was an attempt too to kind of co-opt this celebration as well, and kind of sanitize it, by a committee that ended up inviting, former then Governor Haley Barbour to speak. And Haley Barbour, he's part of the old white planter elite in Mississippi, and even during this period would slip and say kind of really racist, offensive things, So anyway, go to the website, read a little bit more about that as well. And then lastly, one of the really interesting things, have any of you been to the Lorraine Motel, which is now the National Civil Rights Museum? Right, a few folks. Right outside the Lorraine Motel, did you happen to talk to the lady? Yes. So ever since it opened, a woman named Jacqueline Smith has been protesting the museum. And it's a really interesting, she brings up some really interesting questions too about, all right, so once these institutions are created, what is their role beyond just telling the history? What is their role in the communities that they are a part of? What's fascinating about the area around the museum too is that, all right, when I first started going there in 2006, there were a few restaurants here and there, a few stores. Now, and I don't remember what it was like when you were there, Mark, but now there's some luxury condos, there's some fancy barbecue places, there are, I think, American Apparel, so it's so interesting, I think it's kind of a perfect, like her being there just raises some really interesting questions about, right, what's the use of this? If beyond telling the story, what's the use now? And what's the responsibility, you know, that comes along with sharing the history and connecting that history to current struggles. So phase 3, it's kind of interesting too. You know, towards in the last few years of the course, you know, back in 2006, you know, this was before Trayvon, this was before Ferguson, you know, this was before all of these events that have, in a way that I think is unprecedented in kind of modern, you know, history, have propelled issues around race and inequality into national consciousness, people's consciousness. You know, this, and I think on top of that, you know, these incidences and, you know, the fact that, you know, now at our disposal we have this technology that allows us to capture stuff, right? Right? We got our smartphones with really good cameras, you know? So, you know, if you don't believe me, got it on camera. I think that kind of added into kind of the interesting reactions, interesting using it in Minnesota, the reactions to the election of President Obama, you know, have brought a lot of things more to the surface. You know, and if you see here, this is actually in Montgomery again, where you have some folks who are protesting, you know, efforts to remove the Confederate flag, you know, from the state capitol. So when looking at, well, how, you know, this process of you know, resistance and so forth. You know, you have you know, interesting efforts to reclaim spaces. So this mural here was actually drawn by some high school students in Nashville. The highway that's above that mural is a highway that played the role that highways play in many places, almost every city in the United States. It was a highway that devastated a black community, basically split it in half and destroyed this commercial corridor. Right? You know, a vibrant, you know, community of stores and businesses and so forth destroyed by this freeway. You know, and Kwame, again, he was a SNCC veteran. He was one of the coordinators of the Freedom Rides. You know, he continues his work. He's one of these folks who's continued working, not just kind of resting and telling old stories over and over, right? You know, he just, in amazing ways, just comes up with really innovative ways to always adapt to the ever-changing, you know, manifestations of racial oppression, you know. You know, you have folks too, you know, who are attempting, you know, to kind of claim spaces through means such as statues. You know, for instance, Kwame again, you know, happened to hear stories about Tennessee soldiers who fought in the Union side of the Civil War, spent several months with his kids looking through this Civil War cemetery to find these graves, and then one of his kids found them and raised the money to create and put up the statue of a Black Civil War Union veteran. You know, and Charles McLaurin, again, if you read any book about the Mississippi movement, Charles McLaurin will be one of the people in it. He was a field secretary for SNCC in Mississippi, and a close friend of a woman named Fannie Lou Hamer. Has anyone heard of Fannie Lou Hamer? Yes, one person. Yeah, I'm not surprised that only one person raised a hand, but all of y'all should have your hands up at some point. So look her up. Look her up after she was an amazing woman who, amongst other things, an amazing organizer, but amongst other things, gave this speech that changed politics in the country in 1964 Democratic Convention, calling out, the Democratic Party on its racism in a very public way. So anyway, finally got a statue of Fannie Lou Hamer in Louisville as well. You also have some organizations like Equal Justice Initiative that are doing some amazing work to make connections between current struggles and past struggles. In the top there, you see a star, and that star is actually a star on the steps of the Alabama State Capitol in Montgomery that marks the spot where Jefferson Davis stood. Who's Jefferson Davis? Yeah, President of the Confederacy, right? Yeah, so, the folks who broke off, and fought in the other side of the Civil War, right? Yeah, so there's a star on the state capitol steps commemorating where he stood. And Montgomery is so interesting, because I think even more intensely than many other places, you see the battle of the narrative playing out on the ground, between like all of these historical markers that would make you think that the South won the Civil War, and more historical markers commemorating the struggle against racial oppression. And one of the organizations that's been taking a lead on this is an organization called Equal Justice Initiative. Have any of you seen the documentary 13th yet? One person. All right. How many of you have Netflix? You all need to watch that daggone documentary. 13th is the name. The director's a woman named, I think Ava DuVernay. And it does an amazing job, connecting, again, slavery to the current prison industrial complex. Amazing. One of the organizations that's featured quite prominently is EJI. And here, this is these bottles here. Can you tell what these bottles are? What's in them? Well, close. I mean, it's dirt. But EJI is doing a project where they're collecting dirt from the sites of the hundreds of lynchings that took place in Alabama. And they're involving community members in the collection and students in the collection of this dirt. And these bottles are going to be, they're on display already in their office, and they're going to be on display in a museum that EJI is creating as well. EJI, again, is playing a major role in kind of bringing forth to the surface the role that Montgomery had in the slave trade. It was one of the major slave markets of the South. Yes?
Okay, so the names that are on those jars, that have a little writing underneath those.
Yep.
Can you tell me more?
Those are the people who were lynched and the locations. Yep. All right. And then lastly, so the course right now has its home base, Jackson, Mississippi, which is, anyone from Mississippi? Okay, all right. I mean, what do folks usually think about when you hear Mississippi? Slavery, like what else? Huh? Country, right? Usually negative things, right? Right? Yeah. Well, what's so interesting is that Mississippi, all right, so there's some things that are pretty bad, right? As far as, particularly when it comes to, the health and wealth and so forth of African Americans in Mississippi. However, I think in the midst of that, there's some amazing, innovative organizing work that's happening there. You know, through organizations such as Cooperation Jackson, you know, that's aiming to, you know, build upon the work of a mayor that sadly passed away in 2014, a man named Toko Lumumba, and an organization, the Cooperative Community of New West Jackson, which is an organization that, you know, it's actually a group of families, you know, that have purchased land in one of the worst areas, you know, the most abandoned houses, you know, issues with drugs and crime, purchased a bunch of abandoned properties and are, through their organizing work, mobilizing the resources of the community right there, you know, to rehabilitate these houses and these property and created, you know, an urban garden, a bed and breakfast that's doing quite well, you know, a house for catering and so forth. So as I kind of wrap up, you know, it's one of the really interesting things that came out the last year that I taught this course, you know, earlier this June, you know, is this question of, you know, what does it mean to be free? So you have all these movements, you know, we're fighting for freedom, right? Well, what does that mean? You know, and I think that, you know, in this phase, there's this really interesting questioning, you know, about what does freedom mean now, and to what extent, you know, are we free? You know, we may be free on paper, you know, we may have rights officially, but what does that freedom mean if you don't feel safe, you know, from the state? You know, if you don't feel protected by the state, you know, and so forth. You know, so I hope those of you who are planning on heading to college will end up in this class so that we can have that conversation. And I think I'll leave it there for now, so we can have some time for some Q&A. All right.
All right, thank you. One person do that, y'all, Central, y'all gotta take off real quick. Okay, so we don't wanna disrupt, but y'all know, go ahead, quietly. Thank you for coming out, y'all. Yeah, definitely, grab some food. We're going to continue on with Professor Jones up here. Have a nice discussion, continuing on to unpack what this all means.
Okay, that's fine, anyone.
And again, thank you for coming out Central High School. Our future right there, y'all should be recruiting them to come to Metro State University. All right, so again, Professor Jones, thank you for, that was a lot to unpack. So we're gonna have some time now to unpack it.
Yeah, I should have timed it, sorry.
Oh, no. There's a lot for us to really discuss. So let's start it off with this one simple little question.
Yeah.
The one story that is burned into your to your soul
Oh.
through all your experiences. Share with us that, and then we'll go from there.
There is a story, actually from this year. And I'm going to try to tell it in a way, because it relates to a conflict of sorts. And I'm friends with folks on both sides of the conflict. So I'm going to try to tell it. So in the past few years, there are a whole bunch of commemorations. You know, it's like 50th anniversary of everything, right? And there's one anniversary celebration where some elders were called out on something. Okay? So it was a celebration. Oh gosh, I'll just talk about it.
No,
Deal
just
with the
go ahead.
consequences,
Yeah,
right?
just
Right?
go change.
All right, thank you. Right, so it was a celebration related to the March Against Fear. You know, so James Meredith, you know, it's March Against Fear, he was shot, and then others from, you know, SPLC, SNCC kind of continue to march. So, right, so there are a variety of celebrations, but one that I went to in particular, it was particularly powerful, you know, in unintended ways. So going back to 2014, it was another 50th anniversary. And a part of that anniversary, you know, as part of it, some of the youth organizers, so there were elders who organized their piece and then youth that organized their piece. And the youth organizers planned an action at the Nissan plant in Canton, Mississippi, which was and still is somewhat notorious for some pretty bad labor practices, you know, particularly related to the use of temporary workers and kind of denying people enough hours in order to get benefits and, you know, just kind of the typical stuff, right? Fast forward to this year, we're at this commemoration, and under the banner of the commemoration is this huge Nissan banner. So my teaching assistant and I, we kind of walking like, what's up with this, right? And then we get some fans, some that have Nissan with pictures of all sorts of, you know, people of color on it, you know, where we love diversity, all that stuff, right? Right. And so events going on, and then a young woman, a young white woman from the University of Mississippi, you know, stood up and said, wow, you know, I appreciate what's happening here and so forth, but what's up with that Nissan? Right? Right, she said it, you know, in a much more articulate way, right? Right, and it was so interesting because immediately the facilitator said, no, we're not having any of that here, right? And someone came, you know, and took her away from the microphone, you know, and, you know, there was a veteran in the audience who said, you know, kind of defended her, you know, that's a legit question, right? But it you know, things kind of went on. Later on, at another part of that celebration, you know, it was really fascinating to me that banner was there again, as well as a band, a Nissan band, playing music, you know, right? As well as, you know, folks kind of saying, you know, thanking Nissan over and over and over, right? Right, and this young woman was passing around, you know, some stuff about the suit. Then, long story short, some of my students, a little later, she kind of disappeared, and we saw her outside being kind of, yeah, there was a woman, elder, veteran, kind of ripping into her, and she was sobbing. So one of my students said, isn't anyone going to do something? I was like, are you the anyone? Right? Right. So she goes out, and a few other students kind of go out and kind of stand by her, right? And just kind of listen, don't say anything, just listen, right? And then the berating stops. But it was really interesting too, in a panel that followed, something that often happens, unfortunately, as well. You have, sadly, and this is not everyone, this is not all movement veterans, but sometimes you have some veterans who just say and assume really negative things about young people. And just say, all right, young people, they just need to kind of follow what we did and pull up their pants and all that stuff. And that's not like too much of a difference from what's actually said, right? Right, and this is the last part of the story. At the end, there was supposedly going to be this intergenerational dialogue, right? And my students weren't having it. So, when the facilitator, who's actually someone I care for near and dear personally, it's kind of coming to my students, say, no one has anything to say, right? And then I was like, give me the mic. And, I note that I basically say, kind of share, all right, here's why the students don't want to talk. They brought up this, they seem to be bothered by this apparent Nissan situation. And they saw how a young woman who spoke up about it was treated, and now they don't want to say anything, right? Right, and it was an interesting discussion. The students still didn't say anything, but it was a really interesting discussion amongst the veterans about, all right, is this, like whether or not some kind of saying, this space isn't appropriate for that. This is a commemoration, this is a celebration, not appropriate. Versus other veterans who are like, fellow Snickers, in our time, we disrupted all kinds of events, so it's hypocritical of you, to kind of tell this young woman, that she shouldn't call us out on our stuff, right? So I think it was a really powerful lesson on a whole bunch of things, around, the influence on money on movements and activism, about, generational differences within movements. As a teacher, it was amazing, from that. But, it is, I'm still dealing with some consequences.
Still unpacking.
Yeah.
Questions from the audience, questions?
Do you know if Nissan and the
Right here.
Hello.
Hi.
My question for you is, considering these past two social movements that the display in the exhibit kind of highlight in today's society, in the new Black Lives Matter movement, and that's whole social movement. Can you speak to anything what you think, how or what the core focus, because like I know how like to end slavery for the Emancipation Act Proclamation, and then civil rights for equal voting rights and other liberties and civil liberties. But what could you speak? I know it's fairly new as well too. So if anything, like what do you see of that out of that social movement? What the core focus about?
As far as Black Lives Matter?
In the new movement, and do they have a consensus among Black Lives Matter chapters?
Right. Well, I think it's a different type of movement. And I think it's so interesting. I don't know if anyone, I saw, a posting about recent comments that Elaine Brown, former Black Panther member, shared about her view of Black Lives Matter. Did anyone see that? you know, apparently, I guess, you know, she was quite critical of it, you know, and noted, I think, like a lot of folks, you know, like, you know, I don't know what the heck this is really, you know, beyond, you know, people protesting and, you know, blocking roads and whatever, right? It's not seeing, you know, what's the concrete thing that you're fighting for, right? But I think, like I said, it's a different type of movement. And I think, all right, well, what are they fighting for? I think that's often context specific. And I think the form that it's taken is a response to a few things. I think one is just this general distaste that I see amongst young people about institutions in particular, right? Institutions, period, right? And I think that goes across race, right? Another is...
You mean distrust in this?
Yes, distrust in institutions, yeah. Yep. Secondly, kind of the advent of these technologies that allow people to communicate with one another across space and time, you know, instantly, you know, and also capture images and share them instantly too. So I think there's a technology piece too. But I also think it's a response too related to, okay, so well, what's happened to leaders of movements, particularly movements that have aimed to bring about major change? What's happened to leaders? Yeah, right. I mean, killed, jailed, etc. You know, so I think in response, you're seeing the emergence of movements that are perhaps embracing, you know, what sometimes is called a leaderless model. Leaderless model, even though, you know, it's kind of leaders in a different way. You know, the leaders are the ones who kind of control and coordinate the communication. You know, so I don't think it's technically leaderless, but it's a different type of leadership, right? You know, so I guess the question is, what is the aim? I think it's related to the question of, okay, so I know in certain contexts, movement is connected to formal organizations that are doing, you know, some, you know, that have doing, you know, policy work, you know, and work on the ground and so forth, right? You know, so I think about the relationship between Black Lives Matter, Minneapolis, and organizations like NOT, for instance, right? You know, but I think also, you know, it's kind of provoked in me thinking about, okay, so is actually communication about what's happening, you know, a valid action as well? You know, and one of the things that made me think about that is, you know, I brought this up in my class. We were actually talking about this in a politics, media, and organizing class last week. And, you know, one of my students in the class, he said something really interesting, and he was an African-American student, was not. You know, he said, you know, nowadays, you know, in the past, all right, I see, you know, someone stopped, black person stopped on the side of the road, you know, yeah, I didn't really pay attention. You know, now, you know, I'm kind of like, oh, what's happening there? Do I need to kind of get my camera out? You know, right? You know, so yeah, you know, I think as someone, you know, who's kind of a tweener, you know, I'm not, you know, on my phone all the time. You know, I'm not young. You know, I've come to terms with that, right? I'm constantly connected young people, right? You know, but I'm not quite, you know, a Luddite either, right? So yeah, so it's for me, you know, so I sometimes kind of, you know, find myself slipping into looking at, you know, these movements that seem somewhat disorganized to me, you know, through my old people lens. And then I have to kind of back up and say, okay, so what is it, what don't I know, right? Recognizing what don't I know and what can I learn, from what these young folks, mostly young folks, but largely, but not all, are doing, So I'm not sure I answered your question, but those are just some of my reflections, long reflections on that.
All learning experience. We have one here, real quick.
Oh, is the Nissan kind of a example almost of erasure? They're just, or maybe they completely reformed their work habits, their work situation? Or are they more or less ignoring it and giving money to support the things, which really doesn't address the problem?
I think it's largely the latter, right? But that's typical. I mean that's kind of,
We see that a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really common today, whether it's financial or things related or something wrong, right?
Right, kind of making up for, your bad practices here by giving money over here. Right. Mm-hmm.
Just to
Yeah.
maybe continue the discussion a little bit from this young man's question.
Yeah.
Could it be too, because I kind of asked myself that question too, with Black Lives Matter, seeing that, I've been organizing for a number of years and have participated, in been kind of one of them down low leaders.
Right.
Different initiatives.
Yep.
But, I often wonder, and, I ask the question, well, what's the aim? What's the critical framework of Black Lives Matter? But then again, I come back up and I say, but you know what? I'm going to give these young people that space to perhaps figure it out. And one thing I always ask myself of the civil rights movement, when we study it now, we look at it, at the final stages where, hindsight is always 20/20, where you can look back and you can say, oh, this happened, that happened, voila. But I wonder, even in the historical analysis of the movement, can anyone say in the beginning part of that movement that there was lack of clarity?
Yes, absolutely.
As well.
Absolutely.
And that,
Absolutely.
a lot of times, because I know even in initiatives I've been a part of, I knew something was wrong, and sometimes you just have to seize the moment because there's critical alignments of things.
Yep.
But everything wasn't set.
Right.
And sometimes you go through the movement and things begin to crystallize. And your language or your framing, becomes a lot more clear, or just becomes clear, period. And so, I think maybe an answer to your question is time will tell.
Right. Well,
But still leave that space for that maturity to occur.
Yep. I think well put. There's just quick story. There's everyone we talk to, talks about, we were kind of figuring out as we go, right? There's a brilliant section in Eyes on a Prize episode that talks about the Albany movement. There's a movement veteran, Charles Sherrod, who's talking about, he used this metaphor, we kind of stomp here and we stomp here, and if someone yells, it's like, all right, that's where we need to stomp some more. And then he kind of ends the same thing. We didn't know what we were doing, right? Right, yeah, and I think, like I said, it's the danger, of historical representations is presenting this image that everything was always figured out at the beginning. So thank you.
And not everyone was always on one accord.
Exactly.
But they had to have a leader that was the face of the movement, and there are leaders within that movement.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not always on one accord. I grew up in a community where we met all the time, but there was always one leader that was the face, but there were many leaders within. And you do figure out things as you go on. You know that there needs to be change. You don't know how to get ahead of the oppressive system. Because every day new information comes out. So you have to meet, you'll make mistakes along the way. Because I don't always know in terms of the whole Black Lives Matter movement, but I do sometimes see leaders that, where some leaders have their own agenda, but the mission is supposed to be about that Black Lives Matter and how can you make things better for all, for Black people, but also for all people, and to create a new system that practices equity and equality. I think that that's what it's about. However, sometimes the message that gets out there is a different message because you have some people that are joining the movement because they're angry and rightfully so, but may not have the skills or the tools to navigate and know when to hone certain things and certain behaviors. So I appreciate the things that you guys said. I've been thinking about a lot of these things as well. And I think a lot of times our young people definitely need a space and place to have a voice, but to also know how to exercise what their rights are, exercise how to be a part of the system to help change it, because you can't change the system if you don't understand. You don't understand the genesis and the roots of racism and the oppression within our system. So, okay, but thank you so much. I didn't even get the mic. I apologize.
Do you want to kind of hit that one real quick and then,
Well, I'm just making a statement. Not that you can say.
You can go ahead. But yeah,
Thank you for coming, by the way. Perceive there to be there's these incredible bubbles that I feel are a major issue between cultures, between the digital divide, between genders, between age. I read your biography on HECMU, I believe it was.
Wait, what?
HEMCU. There's a part of a webpage that has your experience.
Oh, Hecua? Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Oh,
there we go.
okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
And one thing that really stood out to me is your experience, your world travel, your experience with different groups, and how you've been hands-on. You had a quote about one of your favorite things about working with students is working with them to be hands-on in trying to figure out the issue or to deal with the issue. And I guess my question is, what can you recommend to our youth? What are ways that, because we should all be reading our history and dealing with erasure, but what are some hands-on ways that what do you do with your students for them to be able to actually get hands-on in the issue?
Well, I mean, I think you think about teaching like an organizer. As much as possible, you push your students to think about, all right, so what is it that I care about? What am I passionate about? You create spaces for them to build relationships with one another, and connect with other folks who share the same passions as them. And you, as you can, provide tools to help make that happen. So for instance, maybe I could share a little bit about what I do in this course, maybe, right? Just get more concrete, right? So this course, we get students from, that span age, race, experience. They tend to be diverse in every way, and one of the things that I do immediately is I make all the students tell their story, so I use this organizing tool called the River of Life, to kind of get students, using the metaphor of a river and the image of a river to tell their story of how they got to here. Then we make students do one-to-ones with one another, so that's kind of an organizing tool where you provide a space for students to get to know one another's passions and interests and so forth. And get students to think about, okay, so creating this learning space and growing space isn't just my responsibility, but you all have a responsibility in creating that space too. And it would be easier for us to create that space if you actually get to know each other. And it'll be easier for us to have those difficult conversations if you know a little bit about where people are coming from and their backgrounds as well. And then, through a combination of studying, theories of social movements and social change, studying different, kind of schools of organizing and ways of thinking about community organizing, particularly I tend to go grassroots, is kind of my thing, right? You get students you push them to both kind of hear and learn from the lessons that our elders are sharing with us through those experiential activities, through going to those spaces, through hearing their stories. But also, we connect with organizations that are doing work in the here and now, and hear how they're doing that work as well. And then pushing the students to connect those stories to their own stories and experiences. And that's kind of the key piece, to make it real. And there's a lot more to say about that, but I'm looking at the clock. So we're gonna have a conversation.
Yes. Thank you, Professor. Thank you. Everybody, Lena Jones. We have one more piece to deal with, which is our video celebration, Rich. Professor Honors, and please come up. And we're going to announce the winner and show the video from